I'm delighted to introduce our distinguished panel, who are going to discuss the future of sustainability from transition to transformation. We have Adnan Amin, Director General of the International Renewable Energy Agency, with the mandate to promote the adoption and sustainable use of renewable energy worldwide. Prior to joining IRENA, Mr. Amin was head of the Secretariat of the UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination. Welcome. David Stanners is the head of international cooperation at the European Environment Agency in Copenhagen. For the past 20 years, he's been working very closely with UNECE, UNEP, and other organizations around the world to promote the development and sharing of environmental knowledge. Next to me, Tim Campbell is chairman of the Urban Age Institute. The Institute fosters leadership and innovation among cities in areas such as strategic urban planning, sustainability, and poverty reduction. And for more than 17 years, he worked for the World Bank, pioneering the bank's cities development strategies. And certainly, last but not least, Olivier Cataneo is adjunct professor and research associate at Sciences Po Paris. He previously worked in the French government, most recently as a G20 advisor to the Minister of Agriculture. So each panellist is going to make some opening remarks on their specialist area. And I'm going to ask Mr. Amin to start the ball rolling on the subject of energy as a key sector for green transition.
Well, thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure for me to be back at the United Nations, where I spent many years in the past, as you reminded us. And you realize you're getting older because the years have passed, but they're both good things and bad things. The good thing is that there are so many of your friends you see sitting on podiums. So I had the great pleasure of having the chairman, the executive secretary, and the deputy executive secretary as old colleagues and friends from the past. The bad thing is you have a consistent sense of déjà vu. And I remember 7, 8 years ago in the United Nations, when we were confronted by a very serious trifecta of crises, where we had a rapid escalation in prices of basic foodstuffs around the world, causing social instability in many countries. At the same time, it was related to a rapid escalation in the price of fossil fuels and energy. And we had a near meltdown situation in the global financial markets, indicating the fact that the structure of the global economy is not sustainable in its present format. We're still discussing it today. And I think that I'm very pleased to be here for this meeting because we are beginning to see the emergence of much more targeted thinking about specific solutions. And it was, I agree totally with what my friend Mark Halle was saying, that we really need to identify what is the crisis of governance, how do we make decisions, and where are the areas that we can move fast. From our perspective, what we are dealing with in my agency is the issue of sustainable energy and a future energy system that can create transformative change. So it's very much in line with the theme of the meeting. And clearly we live in a planet that's hungry for energy. Global energy demand is predicted to rise by a third by 2035, despite the significant improvements in efficiency and conservation of energy use that we have achieved over the years. To meet this demand, in our view, governments are facing investment and infrastructure decisions on a scale that will define the development for generations to come. And with concerns about the environmental and economic sustainability of hydrocarbons growing, the cost of renewable technologies falling, we face a historic choice, but we also have a historic opportunity. A prolonged global economic crisis, political uncertainties in some of the oil exporting countries, high energy costs and price volatility, as well as more frequent natural disasters, expose economies to substantial supply insecurity. The landscape has also changed. Countries that once were not major energy consumers are now energy hungry, and those used to depending on others for their energy supply have become producers. As the world proceeds on our current disturbing 4-degree temperature increase trajectory, we face severe impacts of climate change and the prospect of a global population reaching 8 billion by 2030 with rapidly increasing energy demand. These developments are creating a new global dynamic, and one thing that we can say with certainty today is that there is a widespread conviction that renewable energy will play a major role in addressing the challenges that we face. The evidence of this conviction is everywhere. Over 120 countries now have some type of national policy target or renewables support policy in place, an increase of 65 since 2005, and I had the great good news from the distinguished Secretary from Serbia about the adoption of their new policy measures by the legislature very recently, and I congratulate them for that. However, 2012 was yet another record year for new renewable energy installations globally. Solar PV now stands at 100 gigawatts globally, growing tenfold over the last 5 years, and wind has continued its steady growth to reach 280 gigawatts globally, with Europe alone surpassing 100 gigawatts. In IRENA, our original analysis, which we undertook of 8,000 renewables projects around the world, clearly shows that the cost of renewables is falling, in some cases rapidly. We are seeing, for example, the cost of solar photovoltaic in the last 2 years has fallen by 60%, and we're seeing cost reduction trajectories in wind that are also equally impressive. Renewables technologies are now the most economic solution for new capacity in an increasing number of countries and regions. In situations where oil-fired generation is the predominant power generation source, such as on islands, off-grid, and in some countries well endowed with resources, a lower-cost renewable solution almost always exists today. Renewables are also increasingly the most economical solution for new grid-connected capacity where good resources are available. And we anticipate that further equipment cost reductions can be expected up to 2020, which will further lower the average cost of electricity from renewables. As the case for renewables improves, markets are increasingly emerging outside of the developed economies, and they are now found in more geographically and economically diverse areas, indicating the substantial change we see in the global map of emerging economies and the global economy. Let's give you some examples of these extraordinary changes that are taking place. Recently, China announced a commitment of $370 billion on measures for energy conservation and emissions reductions in a 5-year plan to reduce energy intensity by 16% by 2016. This has spurred massive new investment in renewable energy as the most viable source for achieving these efficiencies. China has become the world leader last year in wind installation, with the United States now in second place for the first time. They have increased their solar target to 21 gigawatts installed capacity by 2015, and clean energy generation in China rose 30% in 2012 over the increases in 2011. So we see dramatic growth, but also huge challenges that are faced by large growing countries like China. If you take the example of the region where my agency is headquartered in the Gulf, where we are known for being an oil-producing region, deriving immense wealth from hydrocarbons, we see substantial change happening today on the ground. Saudi Arabia has set a target to generate 25% of its electricity from solar by 2030, which is requiring $110 billion in investment that has already been committed. This is the beginning of a massive transformation of the domestic energy sector in Saudi Arabia, which we believe is an absolute real possibility, because the not going in this direction will be a disaster for domestic energy in Saudi Arabia, as its domestic energy demand is growing at a rate where it could potentially become a net energy importer by 2020, a situation you will agree is untenable. If we look at Africa, Africa recognizes that it can meet its rapidly growing needs with renewable energy today. We have new growth rates in Africa after a long period of stagnation that indicate dynamic and substantial and sustainable growth. But today, only 20% of the population have direct access to electricity. Thus, the target of universal access to modern energy sources by 2030, as put forward by the Secretary General of the UN, is a tall order. But it's also a tremendous opportunity, offering the continent a chance to undergo a truly transformational change, and Africa is moving fast and in the right direction to realize it. A recent Frost & Sullivan report predicted that investment in renewables in Africa is set to grow from 3.6 billion in 2011 to 57 billion by 2020, representing a 1,500% increase. Africa is also realizing the benefits of integration, with regional grids in the west and south carrying out ambitious plans to increase the share of renewables in their energy mix. We are seeing similar developments in many parts of the world, but since we are here at the ECE, let me mention one. I had the pleasure to visit at the invitation of the government of Montenegro last year to discuss Montenegro's future energy plans. And what became absolutely clear, and I mentioned the new Serbian policy which I heard about this morning, what became absolutely clear is that the technical potential for renewables in Southeast Europe has the business case to become a reality today. We need the policy framework in place, we need the technology cooperation in place, and we need the financing frameworks to enable this to happen. These developments represent the transition that's already underway in the global energy system, with both the production and use of energy set to increase dramatically over the next decades. This represents a crucial change in terms of the long-term sustainability of our energy system and the environment. If we do not get it right, the adverse impacts on the climate and environment will become both unmanageable and irreversible. Rio +20 was a poignant reminder that the ambitious goals we had set for ourselves at the Rio Earth Summit in 1992 remain far from being realized. It also served to remind us that a meaningful consensus on environmental and ecological issues is perhaps harder to achieve today than it was some 20 years ago, but even more pressing. So what can be done to address these challenges? The need to strike a balance between short-term energy needs and long-term sustainability requires tailored approaches taking into account countries' varying economic and political considerations, so no one-size-fits-all. But there's also an ever-increasing need for countries to work together because the challenges we face simply know no borders, and because tackling these issues means going beyond traditional economic thinking and traditional political structures. To achieve this, we need innovative thinking, new solutions, and real action on the ground. The evidence of enlightened policy in Europe alone indicates that over the last 5 years, more than 300,000 new jobs have been created in the renewable sector, and it's estimated that meeting the EU's 2020 climate and energy goals will result in another 1.5 million new jobs related to clean technologies. It's not only the environmentally responsible path to take, it is an economic opportunity to transform our economic structures into sustainability for the future. In IRENA, we are developing the tools that will help countries make the right decisions about their energy future and to implement this transition. In January, we have launched the IRENA Global Atlas, a tool that is charting the world's renewables resources to support investment decision-making. At present, it maps solar and wind potential worldwide with the best scientific resources that are available, and this year we are expanding it to the mapping of geothermal, hydro, and biomass potential. We help countries identify priority actions for their deployment of renewables and assess their attractiveness to investors through the Renewables Readiness Assessment. a country-led effort where we have already assisted some 20 countries to date, with many planned for the future. In support for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, we are developing Remap 2030, a global roadmap that will provide possible paths to achieving the goal of doubling the share of renewables by 2030, as put forward by the Secretary-General of the UN, as well as highlighting gaps and potential for international cooperation. Our preliminary assessment shows that if counting business as usual, we will fall short of that aspirational goal by about 9%. As we undertake a more in-depth analysis, we will also look for possible solutions, including the opportunities for renewable energy technology deployment in end-use sectors, which will make the difference. These are all areas in which we would welcome partnership with the ECE. Meeting the ambitious targets on renewable energy set by the Secretary-General will need a long-term, sustained commitment from all countries, international organizations, private sector, and civil society. The ECE, with its regional presence, sound expertise, and long experience in the field of sustainable development, is well placed to contribute to this effort. We have a long way to go, and I hope that your deliberations in the coming days will carry the spirit of the theme of this discussion, that transition is no longer acceptable. We now need transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amin, for your encouraging remarks about the great strides that many countries around the world are making on renewable energy. I now move on to David Stanners to hear, please, your thoughts on green and healthy futures. Are we moving in the right direction?
Thank you very much for inviting me here to give the opportunity to share some thoughts on this issue from the point of view of the European Environment Agency. So, how do we know if we are making any progress and where are we going? Well, we need to understand, first of all, what the green and healthy futures depend upon. Our assumption here is that green and healthy futures depend upon there being maintaining and strengthening our resource base. In other words, we need to improve resource efficiency. We need to maintain and strengthen ecosystem resilience. And we need to improve and strengthen human well-being. These three pillars, perhaps, of the green economy, these cover not only the relationship between the economy and ecosystems, but also the way in which they provide benefits for human well-being. That interconnection is all important. So, how do we know where we are going? If I were to refer to our latest reports on the environment and sustainable development that we have produced at the European Environment Agency, the overarching finding, which I think is rather encouraging initially, is to say that environmental policy does actually deliver results. Environmental policy in the European Union and its neighbours has delivered substantial improvements to the natural capital base, to the environment. However, results also show, the best scientific evidence also shows, that major environmental challenges remain, which have major consequences for maintaining our future to develop green and healthy futures. Now, normally, environmental priorities remain constant over decades, so you hear continuously from the environmental side of issues of air, water, climate, land, biodiversity. All these things don't change overnight. Maybe they're improving, but they're ongoing issues. A result of these environmental challenges is that whilst these are not changing massively, maybe we have some better influence or understanding over what drives these. But what is most important is that our appreciation has increased considerably over the links and interdependencies between these challenges, as well as the interplay between these in Europe and a large number of global, we would call, megatrends. So as our assessments show that European environmental policies do have an impact, and in fact they tend to have a greater impact so far on improving resource efficiency than on improving or securing ecosystem resilience. And we need to be aware of that. we need to also ensure the policies support the strengthening of ecosystem resilience. It could be due to time lag effects that we don't yet see that, but it's also because some of the gains that have been made have been overwhelmed by broader megatrends I just mentioned before. For example, increases in population, increases in economic development, global trade and consumption patterns. The awareness of the role played by these is increasing in our understanding of environmental issues and the ability to deliver green, healthy futures. If we look at the demand for natural resources in Europe, this exceeds currently our ability to generate what we need from our own resource base, leaving a so-called footprint on the rest of the world. So between 20 and 30% of the raw and semi-manufactured input materials needed for the European economics to function is now imported from the rest of the world. While this reliance on imports is inevitable for some of those things which are not available in Europe, it has also led to a shift of environmental burdens abroad, leading to questions about environmental equity, as has already been mentioned by Mark Haller, ethics, security, justice, and even intergenerational equity issues. This demand from Europe is now combining with continued economic growth worldwide, creating increased demand for Earth's resources. But the world's economy depends upon the global ecosystems to function, to provide the resources, and to assimilate the emissions and the waste. Using resources and emitting pollutants beyond limits will tend to undermine that. So we are in a double bind. Now, this is the overall context, then, that the European European Commission published its new proposal for a general Union environmental action programme up to 2020, the one to follow up from the 6th environmental action programme to contribute to and help solve some of these problems. The proposal, and it's a proposal at the moment, is called Living Well Within the Limits of Our Planet, and it's based upon a 2050 vision centred on ecological limits, a circular economy, and society's resilience. And to move towards this vision, the proposal puts forward 9 priority objectives, 3 thematic objectives, 4 enabling objectives, as well as objectives on global and urban issues. The three thematic objectives, I think, are particularly pertinent to the present discussion. The first one is to protect and conserve and enhance the European Union's natural capital. The second is to turn the Union into a resource-efficient, green and competitive low-carbon economy. And the third is to safeguard the Union's citizens from environment-related pressures and to risks and well-being. Now, all of this should be seen in the context of the broader EU flanking policies to do with the 2020 strategy of smart growth, smart and inclusive growth, the roadmap to resource-efficient Europe, the roadmap towards a low-carbon economy, biodiversity 2020 indicators, blueprint for water. There's a whole mass of legislation out there addressing this future. But I think before we get carried away about the new policy framework delivering, we must also look at the existing policy framework to see what has actually happened and to learn some lessons. Because, indeed, there are many lessons about the existing policy framework and what we already have in place. In a 2012 communication from the European Commission on improving the delivery from EU environmental measures, the Commission says the following. The EU environment industry is estimated to have an annual turnover in excess of 300 billion euros. Uncertainty about implementation possibilities, pathways and timeframes may carry significant costs in terms of missed opportunities. Innovation or improved implementation methods offer the prospect of reduced administrative burden. These are lessons we must learn from the past and must be applied to the future. They also talk about threats, so that threats, delayed or inadequate implementation has many negative consequences. It ultimately harms the environment and human health. And long-term remediation costs, for example, clean-up of illegal waste sites, etc., can be much higher than costs of prevention. And then they also talk about costs of non-implementation. It says the following: the costs of non-implementing current legislation are broadly estimated around 50 billion euros a year. And that's a conservative estimate. These relate not just to environmental, but to human health impacts, those that we can currently measure. So they're probably larger than that. So to conclude, at the EEA, we understand that the green economy is one in which policies and innovations help enable society to use resources efficiently, enhance human well-being in an inclusive manner, while maintaining the natural systems that sustain us. This is what we have to measure if we're going to know if we're going in the right direction. The increasing interlinkages and interdependencies of our economies and societies, and on the natural capital base on which both depend, mean that this must be a global paradigm, must be a regional and a global paradigm for it to be successful. Hence the importance of the Rio outcomes and the importance of the multi-level action which is called for there. In developing a new policy agenda, we need to learn the lessons from the past and not just expect the future to deliver on those. Given the complexity of the issues, we cannot foresee exactly how things will develop. Consequently, we need to take into account policies and introduce into policies adaptive management practices which create feedback loops to allow and empower policymakers to make course adjustments. In addition, we need to develop feedback processes through, for example, education, training and learning to improve and facilitate the understanding and response of civil society so the needs can be met with less demand on resources. In other words, delivering more with less. It can be done, and there's already records of it already happening. And finding all of this, we need to have the right information base. We assume that that exists, and it does not just exist on its own. We need to use the best information from science and from citizens, from satellites and from accounting, integrating all these together with new metrics and models if we are to track and measure our direction of progress. The work in under the UNECE for extending the shared environmental information system across the whole of Europe is part of this. The Eye on Earth process recognised at Rio are all contributions to ensuring that there is a better sharing of and access to this information for action by multiple actors at all levels, as has already been emphasised. And all this needs to feed into the current SDG and post-millennium 2015 Millennium Development Goal agenda setting as well, if we're going to understand and be able to say we are heading in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, for those remarks on the work done in the European Union to move towards a green and healthy future. I will now move to Tim Campbell, who's going to talk to us about how thousands of visits are made every year by city leaders, crisscrossing the globe, looking for innovative ideas. He's going to probe the secrets of successful cities and speculate about the rise of learning cities in a new urban age. The floor is yours.
Thank you, moderator. Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here also, and congratulations to my co-panelists on some really excellent presentations. I have really three messages for you. One is that, as Mark Heller pointed out, and also David just a second ago, nation-states have partners in this game. And cities are those partners, and they're beginning to show us an awful lot of activism. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Second, I'm going to talk about what those cities do, the secret sauce that they have to make change and innovation at the subnational level. Things that can't be done at the national level and things that eventually bubble up to become national policy. And third, I'd like to just point to some of these innovations that cities are making that indeed lead to national policy that then feeds back into the Rio +20 and the ECE agenda here. So it's not just nation states that are innovating, it's also cities. It's not just manufacturing, and it's not just in sectors. But cities do it because they're on the rise. Cities know in a liberalized globalized planet that they have to pull up their socks just to hold position. They understand competitiveness, and so one of the things they do is they go out around the world and look for best practice, because it's, anyone who thinks about an elected mayor, you know you don't have very much time to solve a whole bunch of big problems, so the best thing to do is go out and kick the tires someplace to find out what's been done somewhere else so that you might be able to bring it back home. Rose, do we have the thing up here? Okay. So this slide shows a response to a global survey that asks cities that are the red dots there that you see, where do you go and get new ideas? Where do you find innovations? And so I asked these cities this question. 53 of them responded, and they named 165 cities where they had gone just in the past 3 years. And they're all over the place. North goes to south, south to north, south to south, rich to poor. Most of them visit million-sized cities for the most part, because in a way that's how they can, places where they can get their arms around the problem and sort of understand what's going on. If you visit one of these megalopolises, New York or Mumbai, it's quite difficult to understand the big picture. But what's surprising here is if these cities are at all representative of all the cities on the planet, their size, then there's somewhere between 1,000 and 10,000 visits between and among cities every year. So there's a very active exchange going on between and among cities, generating ideas and maybe building a political constituency that might show up down the road at some point. Now, let me add that these visits are not ribbon-cutting, political, good friends kinds of visits. They are, for the most part, quite deliberate. They're purposeful. Leave me a little light so I can read my notes. Thank you. And they are continuous. Now, let me go to the second point. So we know there's a lot of exchange going on around the globe. I think this is very encouraging. It's saying that nation-states have partners in the game. But what is it these partners do? What is it that cities do to learn well and to adapt things and ideas that they get from an external environment and bring them back home? How do they know it's going to work well? Rose, let's go to the second slide. Here, the essential element is that proactive cities, and there were a lot of them in the survey, develop strategies to learn. They pick topics that they want to go after. It's not a shotgun approach. They're very deliberate about where they're going and why they're going to a different place. One of the things they do is bring in civil society, private sector, women's groups, industry, neighborhood groups, in a way that allows a coherent and transparent decision-making process, because cities know that just because they found a good idea somewhere else doesn't mean that it's going to work back home, and they have to process it to do that. And one of the ways they process it is, whether they know it or not, cities are creating what I call clouds of trust. Here are a couple of clouds of trust, which were developed through interviews within cities. I visited a bunch of them. I did hundreds of interviews. I did some social network mapping amongst people who trusted each other. And you get very different pictures from these two different cities that show, for instance, in the top slide, City A, there's a whole bunch of arrowheads going to 3 or 4 individuals who were named by many people to be trusted others. None of them was an elected official. They were people like the rector of the university or the head of the Chamber of Commerce. Whereas on the lower slide, it's a little bit off the picture, but you see the circle there. There's a group out there that are standing by themselves. It's a little sub-cluster that no one in that cluster was named by anybody else in that city as a trusted other, and nobody in that cluster named anyone else outside of them as trusted others. So they were kind of what social network analysts would call isolates. Okay, they're out there, but the important thing is that that person who was the head of that subcluster was the chief legal counsel for a metropolitan authority that had control over land use. So these kinds of things can help tell us how, what sort of policies might be made to better enable the processing of information to be sure that everybody's included somehow in the decision making. So proactive cities, the ones that learn fast, the fast adopters, the early reformers, have these kinds of mechanisms to develop innovation and learn from others. They create institutional capacity locally. They create websites, and somebody's in charge of learning, and they have to document their stuff so it's available down the road, 5 years down the road, so they can remember what they learned and remember the process of what goes on. By the way, all of this comes out of a book called Beyond Smart Cities that I wrote, was published just last year. Small plug. I hope you don't mind, moderator. The third point I want to make is that some of the ideas that are being exchanged among cities are ideas that are on national and international agendas. Give me an example. Johannesburg hears from Mexico City, who heard from Bogota, who heard from Curitiba, about something called bus rapid transit systems. Okay, they're highly efficient systems that move people in an efficient, low energy intensive way. Johannesburg and Durban and Cape Town and a few other cities began to bring these ideas into their cities, discuss them, get the manufacturers like Volvo and other chassis makers to come in and make their best pitch on how they could do a bus rapid transit system in Johannesburg. There was no national policy for this. This is right in the middle in line with a climate change and low carbon kind of economy. And as a result of what the cities were doing in South Africa, a national policy is now being put in place just for that purpose. You can go down a long list of, in climate change itself, cities like Chicago or London or Freiburg, many in Europe, have really extensive climate change policies happening at the local level that worry about waste, water recycling, resource management, heat management, carbon management, and so on. Some of them are extremely detailed and quite sophisticated. So despite the failures of Copenhagen and Durban and Merida, cities are on the front edge of establishing new practices and new policies that can be useful for nation states. I made a list just sitting here of the cities in Europe that are doing kinds of things that will fall into this account. I'm not going to list it, but it goes from Munich, Helsinki, Warsaw, Budapest, Liverpool, Turin, Barcelona, Bilbao, Glasgow, Copenhagen, Stockholm, Eindhoven, and many others have done very interesting things in lighting, in water, in transit, in gigabit economies of very high-speed internet being extended to cities that help in lots of different ways, in waste management, water management, disaster recovery, and so on. So no one city around the world has developed a grade A strategy in climate change or in carbon, but almost everywhere something has been done. You can find a solution of some kind in the 1,000 cities around the planet that have more than 500,000 population. We've all heard that the planet is urbanized, but we don't often think that urbanization, one of the corollaries is there's 1,000 cities now that are little laboratories that can help international organizations try out new ideas, spread them around, and move the agenda forward. So let me just conclude by saying 1,000 vehicles out there to do good work in the environmental area. They have direct impact in Europe and indirect because these ideas are circulating around the world. And so one of the conclusions was try and make this learning process easier. Recognize that you have partners on the ground moving the agenda forward. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Tim, for your insights into smart and innovative cities in the UNECE region and elsewhere in the world. Olivier, you are going to talk to us about enhancing food security through trade. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Moving back from local to global, I have to talk about food security, trade, with a twist on sustainability, all that in 5 minutes and with a cold. So it will be quite a challenge, but not as challenging as the food security challenge itself. My neighbor here on the panel said that the planet was hungry for energy. I will say that the planet is hungry, full stop. there are actually over 800 million people who are currently undernourished in the world, which represent about 12% of the world population. And we know that the world population will grow by another 2 billion by 2050, which means 2 billion more people we need to feed by then. I will just focus on 4 dimensions of this food security challenge. The first one is availability and sustainability. We need to produce enough food for all those people. And the FAO estimates that we need to increase global agricultural production by 70% by 2050 to meet the needs. And in the developing countries alone, where the needs are greater, this means more than 100% increase in production. We need also to produce with limited resources, such as water. Agriculture is already using 70% of the water that is used by human beings on the planet. We know also, and this was a focus in the background document here, that we need to reduce food waste. Between 1/3 and 1/2 of the food that is harvested is lost before it arrives to the consumer. We need also to meet the challenge of environment that was alluded to before. The second dimension is a dimension of access. We need to ensure access to food for all, and in particular, the most vulnerable, the women, the children. And this is another important issue. The third dimension is one of use. We need to produce food that is safe and nutritious, and also that corresponds to the cultural traditions of the different countries. So we cannot produce for everybody, everywhere, the exact same thing. And fourth dimension is one of stability, because we have seen how to deal with the effects of important food price instability, how to deal and respond to humanitarian crisis if something happens in Sahel, how to deal with it. So these are the 4 dimensions, and as we see, there is not one single instrument to respond to this challenge, nor is it just a national issue, or it has to be regional or even global solution. And we know that it won't be just the states that will provide answers. It will be the states plus the civil society plus the private sector, obviously. And I wanted just to stress in this introduction on food security the link with political stability. We have seen at the end of the 2000s, when there has been a peak in food prices, that there was social unrest in 40 countries around the world that were related to food insecurity. And of course, we have all in mind, again, the Arab Spring and the lack of food and the high prices of food in this region and the link between those. So coming to the second part, trade, how can trade help harness this challenge? Trade is about connecting the farmers to the markets. This means upstreams to the providers of inputs to the farmers and downstream to the consumers or to the intermediaries like retail and so on. So if you fragment the food market chain, if you have unpredictable trade policies, then you create constraints all along the food chain, and you increase the gap between the price of production and the price of consumption, which means that the farmers himself gets less, but also the consumers has to pay more. And this is the impact of inefficient trade. So what we need is more efficiency and more reliability. I can give you an example of African landlocked countries where the cost of transport represents 80% of the cost of the price of exports. And we know we have all examples of containers that are blocked at the borders because of inefficiency, and that this contributes a lot to food waste. So this is all about increasing market access, facilitating trade, reducing some trade distortive measures, I'm thinking in particular of some domestic supports or some export subsidies. But also we need to improve some trade disciplines. I'm thinking, for instance, of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, SPS measures, that if you can improve them and have them widely recognized, then you can improve the standards and reduce food waste once again. The point I wanted to make today about trade is that the trade paradigms, the face of trade is changing. Today we see, and we talk a lot in different fora about global value chains. And we know nowadays, because we are improving the way we are measuring trade, that more than half of trade is trade in intermediate goods and services. More than half of trade happens within those global value chains. So what we have to do is to enhance the efficiency of those global value chains, is to bring more developing countries to join global value chains or to move up inside global value chains. So in terms of the trade experts, we completely have to change the way we were thinking trade. We were thinking more in terms of exports. Now we also have to think in terms of imports, because you cannot become an exporter unless you're an importer. We were thinking in terms of stocks, domestic industries. Now we have to think in terms of flows and global industries. We cannot think only domestically. We have to think regionally, globally. And also we were always thinking in terms of public supports or public barriers to trade. Now we also have to think in terms of private transfers or private barriers to trade. And this is all important for us to think. So in terms of agricultural development, it takes place more and more within global value chains, with transfers that are done from lead firms to suppliers in the developing countries. And we have done a certain number of surveys collecting case stories. We started with the World Bank, the International Chamber of Commerce, and the World Economic Forum in 2011 to look at those transfers within global value chains, in particular in the agricultural sectors. And we see that they are quite significant. They most of the time focus on training, on technology and know-how transfers, and or transfer just of capital. And the two major objectives are always to increase yields or to increase the sustainability of the production. And here we see what was interesting is there was sort of a convergence between the private agenda. They do that obviously for profit. I mean, they want to have more profitable firms, suppliers in the developing countries. But this also converged with the public interest and with increasing productivity, increasing production, and at the end of the day, serving the objective of food security. So I think this is example. We have lots of examples. I could give you lots of examples, just a few ones, I mean, taken from those surveys. I mean, Nestle committed to reduce by 50% pesticide use over 4 years in the USA and 6 other countries. Unilever to source 100% of its agricultural raw materials sustainably by 2020, or to introduce drip irrigation in India, the US, China, to reduce water use. Kraft Food trying to do sustainable cashew or coffee. ADM trying to promote sustainable farming of soy in Brazil, cocoa in West Africa. So you have hundreds of examples like that, where there is a convergence of the public and the private interest. Of course, this creates opportunities, but this also creates risks. I mean, we shouldn't look at it only as something the rosy way. So this creates also new challenges for governments. We cannot leave it all to the private sector. We have seen in Europe recently some scandals about the content of some ready-made dishes, and there are lots of discussion about land grab and principle for responsible investment in agriculture. there is also lots of issues about competition inside the global value chains, and all those are new challenges to address. So I will just conclude with two remarks. The first one is that trade is important, but we should always see it as an intermediate objective. I mean, the final objective should be to increase food security and to have a more sustainable production, and trade can help towards those objectives. And the last one will be to think not only in terms of value of trade, but value for trade. What can we get out of trade? All those transfers that I mentioned that are important of technology, know-how, and so on, from developed countries where the headquarters of the lead firms are to developing countries. Thank you, Chair.
Olivier, thank you very much for your remarks on how trade can help meet the challenges of food security and food waste. We've heard from our keynote speaker, we've heard from our very distinguished panellists. The floor is now yours. We know that you're very keen to have interactive discussions, so I would encourage you to make comments on what you've heard this morning, to ask questions to our panellists. If you would like to take part, please do put your name tag vertically, and somebody will come from the Secretariat to take your name. You will have an opportunity to speak. I'm sure you're looking at your watches and thinking this is 12:30. Well, you have half an hour before we break for lunch, and then we will be resuming discussions at 3 o'clock for another hour. So we would very much like to hear your country's experiences. What has worked in your countries? What policy instruments are effective? What more can be done? What can be done better? So I do encourage you to participate, and I understand that we will first hear from the representative of the European Union. May I? Yes, of course.
Madam Chair, let me perhaps highlight to you a few of the European Union orientations when it comes to the Rio follow-up. And of course, a good thing is that you have heard a lot already on that, so I try to not to avoid repetition and focus on few key orientations. Of course, then certainly complemented with some of our member state colleagues. But let me start by realizing that we had an agreement in Rio +20, the future we want, and we believe that that constitutes a very sound basis for further work in the ongoing quest of achieving sustainable development globally, but also regionally, nationally, and even locally. So first message that I want to say is that the EU is aiming at for an ambitious follow-up for the Rio +20 outcome, and all aspects of that outcome, ranging from developing global goals for sustainable development, financing and resource mobilization, means of implementation, adapting our institutions to deliver sustainable development, and also enhancing the role of the green economy as one important way of delivering sustainable development, and also the range of partnerships and other processes in thematic and cross-cutting areas. If you look at the challenges, the major challenges that we are facing, so I would want to highlight two of most pressing challenges stemming also from the Rio outcome. First of all, the world is facing the challenge of eradicating poverty and at the same time ensuring that the prosperity and well-being are sustainable. I just need to mention that still 1.3 billion people are living in extreme income poverty, and at the same time, as we have heard already, 2/3 of services provided by nature, our globe, including fertile land, clean water, energy, air, and so forth, are in decline. And climate change and biodiversity laws are close to the limits beyond which there will be irreversible effects. That in mind, the European Commission adopted at the end of February a communication, a policy document, setting out its views on the post-2015 overarching framework and underlying and bringing together the objectives of both sustainable development and poverty eradication. So here we fully support the orientations of the UN Secretary General when he has highlighted his orientations. Madam Chair, I want to touch upon perhaps 4 things on the presentations that we heard already and bringing the European Union orientations to those things. First of all, few further words about the green economy. And of course there, as we agreed in Rio, it is one important way of pathway for sustainable development. And here, as has been highlighted already, clearly one size does not fit for all. So we need to take into account different approaches. And here, many experiences already heard today in the EU countries, but other regions of the world are essential when we are now moving forward. Examples include everything from increased energy and resource efficiency, from greening the transport to greening the energy, better waste management, better resource management, management of the materials, and so forth. In our European Union strategy for growth and jobs, so-called EU 2020 strategy, and its 7 flagship initiatives, the green growth is central theme for the first time, and particularly in the roadmap to the resource-efficient Europe. And here I need to emphasize that this is seen also as a new source for employment and growth in the European economy. So the second thing that I want to raise in this discussion is the issue of the sustainable energy. And I just would want to underline and confirm the speaker of the panel from IRENA, who highlighted that improved energy efficiency and increased share of renewables and energy efficient technologies is very important for achieving sustainable development, but also for enhancing energy security. Here, the European Union fully supports, is engaged, and agree on the initiative and build on the initiative of the UN Secretary General on sustainable energy for all, and encourage cooperation with the newly established office to take that forward, a big priority for the European Union. We heard something about the cities, and we know that, if I remember right, something like 80% of the population globally is living in cities, in mega cities, and this is growing. So here again, endorsing what the panelists have been saying is that we must honor the commitments made in Rio to promote an integrated approach to planning and building cities and urban settlements. So this is essential. And of course, as David Stanners highlighted, cities and urban centers is a reinforced priority also within the European Union policies. Finally, I need to touch the issue of the food security, which again has been the theme of the panel. And of course, we in the European Union, we recognize the key role of agriculture and rural development in eliminating poverty. hunger and malnutrition, central theme also in Rio. In this regard, small producers and family farms are essential contributors to resolving these challenges, which are most pronounced in rural areas. And also the strategies, they need to integrate gender equality and realization of the right to food within human rights-based framework. Here we also stress that the need to increase agricultural production and productivity needs to be on sustainable basis. And of course this requires improvements in land and water management, improved agricultural technologies, and appropriate and enabling environment which then could lead to increased investment, notably by the private sector. Here, clearly, poverty eradication, equity, and sustainability go hand in hand and need to go hand in hand. Finally, I just would want to give the EU support to actions via the UN Secretary General's Zero Hunger Challenge, making the elimination of hunger a top priority for global governance. And of course here, highly important is the reduction of food waste and food losses, which are enormous. So, Madam Chair, perhaps with these comments, I just would want to finish my statement by again committing the European Union to an ambitious, concrete, operational follow-up of the Rio + 20 outcome document, and we believe that this is a sound basis for taking sustainability globally forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your commitment. I am going to give the floor to Germany, Turkey and then Romania. I shall then ask the panellists if they have any remarks before we wrap up around 1 o'clock. We have many other interventions from the floor, which is good news. If I can then ask you that at 3 o'clock you come back here very promptly so that we can make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate. We now move to Germany.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Excellencies, distinguished colleagues. We align ourselves, of course, with the statement just delivered by the EU. Let me first of all thank all the keynote speakers and, of course, the panelists for their thought-provoking presentations this morning, especially the very concrete examples for the challenges and solutions on the road to sustainability. It is now our task to define the unique experience and expertise that the UNECE can contribute to implementing the work laid out in the document, The Future We Want. The UNECE can and must play a pivotal role on our road to a global sustainable future. But how and what can the UNECE now contribute? Geographically, the UNECE member states, we all know that, range from big countries to very small countries. We have countries with seaports, with transboundary river systems. We have landlocked countries. Some member states have a vast transit and transport system. Others still have limited transport infrastructure. And if we look at the economic side of things, the UNECE member states range from strong economies to developing countries. We have some member states that depend on agriculture, others are widely industrialized. The UNECE region includes the EU as a unique form of economic cooperation, and other member states have formed looser regional economic cooperations such as customs unions. We also have a wide variety of climate situations, arid regions in Central Asia, regions with permafrost, we have Mediterranean countries, areas situated below sea level. We have the highest mountain of Europe just round the corner. The member states thus will face in the future a widely different affect each and every one of the climate change, and they all need to be prepared in different ways. And yet another aspect, the UNECE member states in their entirety are already using every renewable energy source currently available. The UNECE and its member states should, from our point of view, now make use of this unique and exemplary mix of geographical, economic, and social criteria in their area. It's like a big laboratory that we have available. Many of the UNECE's member states already have taken steps toward a green economy and a more sustainable use of their resources. Others intend to follow, but maybe so far don't have a sound idea of how to go about it. The UNECE, with its experts on environmental issues, on land management, on transport, on sustainable energy, on economic cooperation, on trade, and on statistics, is ideally equipped to lend assistance to all these countries. Green economy, as we understand it, is not a strict set of rules, but rather a move toward sustainable development and poverty eradication, taking into account different approaches, visions, models, and tools available to individual countries in accordance with their national circumstances and priorities. The UNECE's strength is its ability to deal with this broad range of issues that need to be tackled by the country on its way from a traditional economic system to a more sustainable economy. UNECE currently produces statistical indicators in order to monitor sustainability. It works on energy efficiency, it works on more sustainable transport, and the list could go on, as you all know it. Through cooperation and interlinkage between the UNECE committees, the UNECE can identify best practices, it can work on general standards, and it can give guidance to countries in the region, thereby providing examples for other regions and supporting the ongoing post-2015 agenda. Germany is prepared to help on this road, and I think during the lunch hour we will also have an opportunity to look at the tools that we have on the road to sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your thoughts on the contribution that UNECE can make to sustainability. I would now like to give the floor to Turkey.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. From the point of follow-up to Rio +20 and post-2015 development agenda, I would like to highlight one important event that is being held in Istanbul at present. The UN Forum on Forest is holding its 10th meeting session in Istanbul from 8 to 19 April. The forum calls for the action at all levels to promote the health of forests, a vital resource that covers nearly 1/3 of globe and provides an invaluable variety of social, economic, and environmental benefits. The UN Forum on Forests provided an important value and venue for comprehensive efforts to effectively address the challenges to maintain forests and to manage it in a sustainable way. The 10th Forum is being attended by more than 2,000 officials from nearly 197 countries, and 50 countries are presented with their highest officials responsible from forests. The one important event during the session will be the Ministerial Roundtable, and among the concept notes of the Ministerial Roundtable are the forest and economic development, and the other one, the Rio +20 outcome and post-2015 UN Development Agenda. I would like to draw the attention of the importance of Istanbul meeting because it's the first multilateral session on forests in the context of the growing significance of forests in addressing economic development and finance. And secondly, it will be the first high-level segment forum to be held after the Rio Plus 20 conference and prior to the special event during the General Assembly on MDGs and post-2015 UN Development Agenda in September this year. And it will be held after the adoption of the 21st March as the first first ever International Day on Forests by the General Assembly. The objectives of the roundtable is one, providing an interaction platform to share lessons learned and best practices on sustainable forest management, as well as to enhance the contribution of forests and sustainable forest management to economic development. And secondly, to create an opportunity to exchange views at the highest level. Discussions in the roundtable will be included, of course, in the final report of the 10th session of the forum. Perhaps at the very beginning I should have drawn attention that the Istanbul Forum, the 10th session, is the first one which is being held outside of the headquarters of the UN Forum. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. I'd like now to go to Romania.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Distinguished participants, Romania supports the position presented by the EU representative, and in addition to these speeches, please allow me to add some issues more. Romania believes that the major objective of sustainable development is the transition to a green economy, encouraging investments in different economic sectors that will use the natural capital and ecosystems in an efficient, sustainable manner. At the same time, the green economy is a cross-sectorial challenge which can be addressed globally, regionally, nationally, but only with the synergies with other sectors in an integrated manner and gender dimensions based on. As the EU member state, Romania considers the 7th EU Environment Action Programme an efficient way to demonstrate how the environmental policy can contribute to the development of green economy, the improvement of health and well-being by 2020. Moving to a green economy should be defined as a strict set of the rules, but each state should establish implementing measures depending on its circumstances and capabilities. In this respect, elaborating a national action plan regarding the green economy is essential. A circular economy approach to resource use efficiency, integrated cleaner production and industrial ecology should be taken into consideration. We must focus on the development of sectors with high potential for the efficient use of resources, such as schemes for green investment for promoting of technologies regarding the use of renewable energies, the sustainable management of waste, forest and water, rehabilitation of the buildings. Moreover, Romania considers that changing energy prices to include and reflect environmental costs, as well as to make it more affordable to the citizens, will encourage the development of energy-efficient technologies whose use will change to consumer behavior. Strong cooperation between governmental authorities, the business environment, and consumers in order to promote a new approach must become a political priority. In order to find our solution to major urban challenges, Romania has presently 26 cities involved in the EU Urban Act program. On the other hand, Romania considers that green investments are investments mainly in innovation, research and development, as well as in training and retraining in order to ensure the use and application of the new green technologies at full capacity. Information-based instruments can influence behaviors by modifying consumers' preferences towards more resource efficiency or can be used to inform on the benefit of greening the economy. Romania considers that in the process of transition to a green economy based on new green skills, education and training are the tools that can ensure the necessary link between understanding, deepening and solving the problem related to the environmental, economic and social aspects of sustainable development. In this context, Romania has started in February 2013 a process of developing education on environmental protection, sustainable development by initiating training programs whose results will be the development of green skills for the staff in public administration. Furthermore, as of 2013, Romania actively contributes to the work of the Steering Committee on ESD of the UNECE concerning the introduction of new specific skills on sustainable development, both in higher education and in the training of teachers. Also, in its effort to undergo transition to a green economy, Romania, supported by UNECE, will finalize in July this year the second environmental performance review. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks on Romania's transition to a green economy. We are actually going now to wrap up before lunch. We will take the thoughts of our panellists on what you have just said at 3 o'clock. We will now read out the list of speakers who would like to take the floor at 3 o'clock and kindly ask anybody who is not on that list to come and see us here so that we can make sure that everybody has the opportunity to intervene.
Yes, thank you. So I have on my list at the moment the NGOs, Belarus, IAEA, Croatia, OSCE, the Women's Group, Italy, Russian Federation, and Austria. So if there's anybody else where I may not have seen the flag from here, then please raise your flag or just come here and let me know. Slovenia, okay? That's it? Okay, thank you.
So thank you very much for your attention and your participation. Have a good lunch, and we look forward to seeing you back here at 3 o'clock.